Welcome to the SF Bay Area and School Counselors and Education Professionals Meetup Group. I'd like to welcome our speaker, Dr. Dru Tomlin, and his talk, Supporting Young Adolescents, Transitions to and from Middle School. Our Meetup Group is sponsored by CounselHero. CounselHero is trying to change school and college counseling as we know it by building a complete end-to-end system that automates many of the tasks counselors are asked to do in school. This, in turn, will free up counselors to spend more time with their students and impact their lives. One counselor in a school can have as many as 1,000 cases of students, but CounselHero makes it possible to serve all of these with a combination of AI and social emotional learning tests. So go check it out at counselhero.com. Dr. Tomlin is currently the principal of Heritage Middle School in Westerville, Ohio, and has previously served as the director of middle level services for the Association of Middle Level Education. He has also worked as a system staff development trainer and a faculty member for AMLE's Leadership Institute. Receiving a BA from James Madison University, Dru went on to get his master's and also his PhD in language literacy and education from Georgia State University. We're very excited to have him. Please now give your full attention to Dr. Dru Tomlin.
All right, thank you so much. Appreciate it, Xavier. In terms of sharing my screen, okay, here we go. So I'm going to share. All right, so now in presentation mode, do you see like the big screen now?
Yep, I can see
okay.
that.
All right, awesome. All right, and in terms of the chat box itself, I've kind of lost the visual on that one. So if anyone chimes into the chat box, feel free to, let me see if I can expand it and get the chat box back. Nope. All right. Anyways, okay. So welcome to Transition to and from the Middle Grades. My name is Dr. Dru Tomlin, as Xavier told you. So thanks once again for taking time out. This is a really a brief presentation about something that could really be an all-day kind of workshop. So just know that we're going to be drinking through the fire hose a little bit with a lot of information. But here we go. All right. All right. So just so you know who I am and what I've been up to. And why it's important. So currently the principal of Heritage Middle School here in Westerville, Ohio. It's a 6 through 8 school. We've got about 924 students right now, all face-to-face back at school. Some students participating in a virtual setting as well. So that's that. Prior to that, I was the director of middle level services. I'm a parent also of an 8th grader and an 11th grader. So I am currently living the transition experience as an administrator as well as a dad. All right. Prior to that, I was a middle school and elementary school principal and assistant principal for many years, mainly in Georgia. I was also a middle school teacher. I was a high school teacher as well. And before all that, I was a middle school student. All right. So I think it's very important to keep these kind of pictures around, not only just to make yourself chuckle every once in a while, because one of the most important R's, we always talk about the R's of education: reading, writing, arithmetic, and rigor, and relevance, and relationships. But one that gets forgotten sometimes is remembrance, and remembering what we were like during this time. So middle school is the wonder years. We wonder what they're doing. They wonder what they're doing. And we should try to wonder what we did back in the day. So looking at all of what we do through the lens of our own young adolescents. So that's why I include that in there. All right. Okay. Part of, oh, hold on, come on screen. Part of the reason why we're here also is to look at the brain of the young adolescent, and also inside the minds of all of our different stakeholders that are involved in transition. So that's where I really want us to start before we get into like the specific strategies and things like that that can make transition successful. But if you're doing a transition committee or a group or some sort of planning organization or whatever to talk about how you're going to have kids transition from middle and to high, start with role playing. Start with actually getting inside the minds of these different stakeholders, because you need to answer these questions from their perspective, right? What are they hoping for as they transition? What are they worrying about? And what do they think they know about middle school or high school? And then what do we need to do to change the narrative? All right. So again, walking in the shoes of our stakeholders and adopting what they really are thinking and what they're really feeling in their hearts, that I think is one of the key starting places, and that's why it's our opening act. All right. If we had more time, we would do some of that role play right now and maybe put you into different groups and things like that. But again, for the sake of time, we won't. But again, it's important. So before you get to the what are we doing and where was it going to happen and who's going to be responsible, think about who we're actually serving through this transition process. All right. Okay. Next up, of course, knowing who our students are. All right. So young adolescents, here are their major categories of their characteristics. All right. So young adolescents are not just the middle school, but they're ages 10 to 15. So yep, young adolescents are in 5th grade and young adolescents are in 9th and 10th grade. So they're obviously in middle school. And they're not just achieving academically, but they're achieving physically, cognitively, social, emotionally, and psychologically. All right, so just keep that in mind. So, and we'll get to why that's important. So hopefully you studied and you're prepared for this true false quiz. All right, if you're not, don't worry. It's not going to affect any kind of like job security. Not going to report anybody if you don't get these right. Okay, but here we go. It's important to know middle school students are, this is true false, always under construction. That's true. All right, they're always growing, they're always changing, they're always building. All right, are they achieving in multiple areas? I just gave you that one. All right, so that is true. So again, they're not just achieving in academics, but they're achieving in lots of different areas. All right, are they in need of materials for growth? Yes, they are in need of materials for growth. And that's why, yes, there is a curriculum inside school and there's a transition process that is driven by school, but there's also a curriculum outside of school that can sometimes not be as healthy. So that's why we need to make sure we have a robust transition process and a robust curriculum to make sure that our young adolescents are getting what they need, the good materials to sometimes combat those other materials that are out there. Are they seeking guidance as they build? The answer to that is true. Now, are middle school kids going to walk around your building and say, hey, I need guidance as I build myself? No, not necessarily. Some will, and they're in your counseling office, maybe quite a bit, but others, maybe those who maybe need more support, aren't necessarily the ones who seek it out. So, but they are seeking guidance as they build. That's why those relationships are so important. Are they looking for consistency? Absolutely. So there's a myth about middle school being the wild, wild west, and then it's just off the chain and off the cracker. But kids in the middle grades, young adolescents, especially as they're transitioning, they're looking for those routines. They're looking for that structure. So yes, as you build a transition process, it's got to be motivating. It's got to be exciting. It's got to be engaging and warm. So students and families feel like, hey, I get to go to middle school, or, oh, wow, I get to go to high school. But it also has to show, you know what, we've got structures, we've got routines, we've got norms, that kind of stuff, because those are the structures that really help young adolescents grow. And last but not least, F, are they easy to categorize on a list? So that is false. So yes, ironically, we have a list here in front of us, but young adolescents can't be contained to a list, all right? So our overarching question with all of this is, how is our transition process supporting students in all of these achievement areas? All right, or is it more heavy on one area and not so heavy on another? And what can we do to balance that out? All right, so I do want to give a little shout out to AMLE, the Association for Middle Level Education. If you're looking for middle school resources, here's one that I can definitely say is out there right now. This is not only provides so much like good philosophy behind the middle school process, but in terms of knowing young adolescents and everything like that, the successful middle school, this we believe from AMLE. All right, so I was a middle school teacher and assistant principal for a long time, and I knew nothing about AMLE or anything like that. And then I finally got my hands on that thing, on this book right here, and AMLE's resources, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is why I'm doing all this stuff. Now it makes sense. All right, so anyways, there you go. So I won't get too deep into this, but it is important to think about young adolescents and their brains at this time. They're going through the most rapid cognitive and physical change of their whole lives. The only other time that's as rapid and as, big is birth to 3 years old. So how is transition, why is it such a big deal in middle school? Part of it is the brain, all right? So if you don't know much about the young adolescent brain, the frontal lobe is the last to even mature. So things that we really want our young adolescents to be successful with, right? Those executive functioning skills, reasoning, planning, organization, problem solving, impulse control, all of that stuff is still developing, all right? So that's why in the back right here, they've got all these ideas and they've got all these things they want to try. Some of them good things they want to try, some of them bad things they want to try. But the brakes right here, the frontal lobe, those brakes are real soft, all right? So that's why we have to be there with those supportive structures and those supportive relationships, so that way we can help them stop and pause before they do something that they shouldn't do. And that's definitely part of the transition process. The other thing to think about with the brain in terms of the transition process, temporal lobes, all right? That stuff is still developing. Long-term memory, the emotional center, and understanding language, all right? So in terms of, some students are able to think abstractly. Some are still thinking concretely. Some are able to put things in long-term memory. Some are struggling with that still. And then, gosh, understanding language. Woo! So not to get deep into that, but, students receive language and students express language. And, that's nonverbal as well as verbal. So helping them understand how to process that as they transition from middle school to high school. So there's a lot going on in the young adolescent brain. All right. So anyways, just a little thumbnail sketch. If you weren't aware of the young adolescent brain and all of its quirkiness, that's a little bit about it. Okay. I won't go through all of these, but the transition process is a big deal because of the social emotional development going on in a child. All right. So first thing that you need to know, they have a strong need for approval and they may be easily discouraged. All right. So young adolescents, they're looking for that in the transition process. How am I going to be approved? Who's going to approve me? And where am I going to get my approval? And then who's going to help me and support me as I get discouraged? We want students to have resilience. We want them to have grit, of course. But we also need to be there when they, fall. And that's part of the young adolescents. All right. They are concerned about peer acceptance. They have a strong need to belong to a group, with peers being more important. So how do you deliberately and consistently make those connections for kids so they can feel like they're part of a small community? All right, because that's part of the middle school experience, is how do you take a big building and make it feel like a smaller building? So that should be part of the transition process. And we'll get into some strategies about how you can do that. All right. They seek to make their own decisions, but they are still dependent on the values of parents and other valuable adults. So as we all know, working with young adolescents, or if you don't work with young adolescents right now, you were one once, just admit it, right? And you wanted your own independence, you wanted your own responsibility, just like our kids do right now as they transition from middle to high, but they still need adults in their lives to help them out, all right? They do need time to reflect. And moving on to the next one. All right, so that was the social emotional part of it. All right. The psychological part, like why is transition important to the psychological aspect? So they do seek to become increasingly independent, but they continue to need support and boundary setting. So that kind of echoes what I said before, knowing that they need to know that we have those routines and structures in place. They do have fluctuating levels of self-esteem. Levels of self-confidence in academic subjects sometimes often declines. So how do you, through your transition process, make students feel like their self-efficacy in subjects is going to be okay? So that way they can have agency, and so that way they can advocate for themselves. So that can all be part of the transition process. So how do you do that? All right. Next up. They do believe that their feelings and experiences are unique to themselves. All right. So no one understands me. Nobody gets me. Why are you telling me this? You don't get it. Right. So that's what they typically say. And believe me, as I said, I'm a parent of an 8th grader right now, and I do hear that quite often, that I don't understand. All right. So That's something to just understand and listen and come from a place of care, and not to deflect it. All right. And they desire recognition for their positive efforts. All right. So I know I wish we could, engage in the chat room and see about this, but I'm sure that many of you have a PBIS system, positive behavioral intervention system in your school. So that's what we have here at Heritage, and part of that's part of the transition process. Kids want to be recognized for their positive efforts, not just the honor roll kids, not just the perfect attendance kids, but the kids that are, doing stuff that's good, just the little stuff, right? So they have a desire for that. How do you make that part of your transition process? Okay. And they're both psychologically vulnerable and psychologically resilient at the same time. All right. So we say here that, kids have purpose and promise and potential and power. Purpose, promise, potential, and power. So we want them to know that we understand that you might be vulnerable, but you also can be resilient at the same time. So how do you make that part of your transition process? Okay, so let's get into it. So this is what we know about transition, and some of this has changed, right? So this is what we typically do and what we do in atypical times. So the first thing we know about transition is it's a process. It's not an event, but events are important. So what I mean by that is, you can't just have, hey, here's, moving up night, or here is a welcome to high school night. Those are important. Yes, you need to have those big events that people pay attention to shine a light on the transition process. However, if that's all you do, then you're missing out. So what we typically do is we figure out what we want to achieve and why. All right, so what do you really want to accomplish through transition? And then you work with a bunch of stakeholders at all the different levels, at the elementary, high school, and district levels, to plan, schedule, and run events and meetings for incoming families and students. All right, so yes, in May, we typically have a face-to-face moving up night. In July, we have had a transition camp for our scholars. And then in 8th grade, in August, we actually had a 6th grade only day for the first day of school. All right, so those are things that we've typically done in our face-to-face times. Now, what we've had to do from COVID and being distant learning, we just changed how, when, and where events and meetings happen. We use a lot of pre-recorded videos. I can tell you with full transparency that I am a wee video geek. I get into it. I put out videos all the time to make it engaging and stuff like that. I use social media, Twitter, Facebook, wherever our families are. I try to engage with them that way, so they can see where we are. We also know about transition that every adult should give incoming students and families a positive first impression of school. All right, so before we move on, I want to camp out on that one, because think about the people in your buildings. Can you say with 100% certainty that everybody in your building is going to talk positively about your school? All right, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. And you don't want to necessarily muzzle people. You don't want to make people into parrots and create some sort of toxic positivity, as they say. But some people need to be equipped with the script. All right, so they need to role play, just like we were talking about earlier. You need to role play. If a parent comes up to you in the grocery store, you're just trying to buy avocados, and the parent comes up to you and says, hey, tell me about your such and such middle school. I've heard some things. What would you say? You got 30 seconds in the produce section. So those types of role play conversations are very important, because you need to get people equipped with the script of how to talk positively about your school. All right. So part of that is providing clear messages and messaging for teachers and staff. All right. So vision and mission statements, goals for the year, mottos, branding messages, all that kind of stuff. All right. And saying it. And there are certain phrases that I say here that I'm sure some people are like, oh my God, I keep saying that. But the reason I keep saying it, and the reason I keep using that hashtag, and the reason is because that's branding. And if you know anything, I'm not a business person, but I know some things about, hey, how businesses work is almost like repetition. So making yourself visible, accessible, available, and responsive is part of that as well. All right, making your school visible. All right. So we do the same stuff, but we make it virtual. And I wish these links would work, but they don't. But if you want any of this, just email me and I'll send it to you. So communicating regularly and enthusiastically. All right. So using those communication tools that you have and going to where your families are, using those videos. I don't know if anybody in this room has ever done like a Bitmoji classroom or a Bitmoji office. I know our counselors in our school have Bitmoji offices. So I decided to do a Bitmoji office that I'll share with you in a little bit. Another thing too about the transition process is communication should be clear and consistent between elementary, middle, and high. All right. And that's a struggle, right? Because we're all spinning our wheels in our buildings. We're all trying to make things happen in our own schoolhouses. So how do you coordinate with other buildings, especially if you have like 5 feeder elementary schools? How do you get on the same page and just like, hey, make the documentation clear, right? So part of it is make documentation about at promise, or some people say at-risk students, evident to feeder schools. All right, so hey, here are the students that are going to need the majority of support when they come into your school. Make that stuff clear, and schedule meetings, face-to-face meetings with at promise and at-risk students. So that's what we used to do, but now we have to do it virtually. All right, and in some ways, so our district uses Google. Whatever you use in your district, keep on using it as long as it's helpful. But now, in some ways, it's really better because we're not beholden to having to drive to the other school, have to, log in specific miles and all that kind of stuff. Now you got a shared Google Doc and you've got meetups and all that kind of stuff. All right. Last but not least is we know that transition needs to be engaging and active with positive support. All right. So as we know, transition activities should appeal to students' physical, behavioral, and social tendencies. All right. So school visits, transition camp, 1 grade only first on the first day of school, with student leaders. All right. So that's what we used to do. A lot of that face-to-face work. So now we have web in our school. So where everybody belongs or where everyone belongs, that web program. So if you don't have that in your school, I really advocate for it. It's good stuff. And, the leaders there encourage students along the way. All right. Again, I appreciate everybody kind of listening in. Again, I wish there was more opportunity to collaborate and connect via Zoom. I guess we'll have some time for Q's and A's at the end. All right. So just to kind of show you, this is the virtual office that I created over the summer because I knew that I couldn't have like students in my building and families coming to visit and that kind of stuff. So here's my little office. And these were links, and they are links that I'm afraid if I click them, then we'll not be able to get back onto the screen. But we have a reading program. I know that 6th graders were concerned about, opening their lockers. So we have a little YouTube thing about opening a locker, some meditation and mindfulness stuff. We even had a dance called the Husky Hustle. So we had all that. So that was a way to kind of open up my office in a virtual way. So there's that. All right. So if you haven't used a Bitmoji classroom, it's really super simple. It's just a Google slide and you just put a bunch of stuff on it. Here you go. All right. Oh, we already did that. Oh, no, we didn't. Okay. What we also know about transition is that transitions work better when there are structures that are familiar to students and families. So that means that thinking about, of course, like how your building's going to look and next year, thinking about the master schedule, that kind of stuff, structuring your school day with interdisciplinary teaming, student mentoring, and block scheduling. That can help like a 5th grader moving into middle school have more familiarity. Like, oh, okay, cool. We're doing something that feels a lot like teaming. Same with high school. That's why a lot of high schools have implemented 9th grade academy because it feels very much like middle school teaming. All right. So in atypical times, we continue teaming and ensure that teams communicate with students and families as a team. All right. Transitions should involve curricular conversations. So typically we have vertical planning conversations throughout the year for teachers and staff. All right. Not just at the end where we're like, all right, what did the kids not learn and what do the kids should learn and that kind of stuff, but throughout the year, what are the standards, what are the power standards that students should know and learn as they matriculate up from 5th to 6th, and then 8th to 9th, if that's how your school is structured. And again, now that we're in the COVID time, the atypical time, it's the same, but it's virtual. All right. And I think using shared Google Docs and that kind of stuff can really help with that kind of collaboration. It is, of course, it's helpful to know what school is like at every level. So if you have always been a middle school person, or you've always been a high school person, go down to the elementary school and visit, or go down to the middle school and visit if you've always been a high school person. In middle school, go up to high school and visit. Because I personally am tired of conversations of like, oh, well, at the high school, it's real tough up there. Or elementary school folks saying the same thing. Oh, at the middle school, they're not going to tolerate that. They're very tough. There is, from being at all those different levels, elementary, middle, and high, because I've been at all three, there's great flexibility and understanding at all of our levels, so people don't get more, nasty and rigid and all that kind of stuff as they, go up to the different levels. So I, just want you to look at what schools like at each level so we can stop these mythologies, get into those different schools. All right. And last but not least, transition works better when all stakeholders have a voice in the process. All right. So helping students set academic and behavior goals can be really, really important. All right. Establish a transition planning committee that includes people from elementary, middle, and high. And I know it's challenging. I really know it is to coordinate with all those different stakeholders. But if you want to do it right, then you got to involve all those people. And now that we're, in the COVID atypical times, again, do it through a shared document. All right. So if you can't be in the same building, then use your Google Meet and use your Google Forms and ask students and families to set goals. All right. And then you can actually collect that information and use it to do some planning. So for instance, as we go through our transition process here, part of our Google form for our students coming up to our school is going to ask them what their interests are. Why are we doing that? Because we want to, maybe build some clubs next year that are specifically focused on their interests, not just what we're interested in, but we need to figure out what they're interested in and have clubs that appeal to them. All right. Okay. Next up, so it's also important, and this could be part of a transition steering committee. This can be a faculty-wide conversation. This can be just your admin team, however you want to do it. All right. But collecting qualitative data about transition. All right. That's key. And I've done this with faculty and staff on just chart paper, regular piece of paper, whatever. Doesn't have to be any kind of thing that's fancy. But here's the protocol for it. All right. It starts with a very simple shape. This circle in the middle. If you ask this question of your transition planning committee, that's where you start. What do we believe about transition? What should it accomplish? Right? That's the why. That's the why of it. Remember, you always got to start with the why. What do we believe? Then on that side, you have people draw this shape and fill it in with answers to this question. What is our school doing well for transition? Right? What's working? All right. If this is what we believe in the middle, what are we doing well that helps with that belief? All right. And then you could probably guess what's on the other side. Have them draw that shape and then ask that question and have them fill it in. What does your school or our school need to do more of in the future? All right. To align with that belief. So what I've found is, but you've got to start with that circle. That circle is the key. It is a bow tie. And as you know from a bow tie, the most important part is that knot in the middle to hold it all together. So you got to start with the beliefs. You can also use this as like instead of a bow tie, you could do it as a propeller, right? The most important part of the propeller is that little middle part that holds the two blades together. If you don't have the thing hold the blades together, they're just going to fly off and you're never going to be able to take off the ground. So this kind of protocol can really be helpful and really help people understand that, hey, we do this thing for transition, but it doesn't align to anything that we believe is really helpful. All right. So again, going back to the why and then walking in the why, as somebody once said. Okay. So this is just some stuff that we've done here at school that you can take, you can steal, you can email me and say, hey, do you have this document? I'd love to look at it. So this is what we've done. So on July 2018, we had a 5th to 6th grade transition camp. All right. And before we got going, we lined up all the stuff we needed to have. Transition camp flyer to promote it. When kids started to sign up, we had them in groups. We did a pre-camp survey to figure out what they wanted to know and how they felt about middle school. And we did a post-camp survey, and we looked at the results from the pre and the post to see what the effect was. And then, of course, all of it was based around these transition camp events. And again, I wish I could click on that link and it would take me to the events, but I'm kind of nervous about doing that. But I can describe what we did. All right, so before we get to that, so the camp events, we did we did locker races. So we had kids, they were kind of in a race situation, and they would try to open up a lock and that kind of stuff. We did they met the school resource officer and talked with him about decision making and his role at the school, so that way it wasn't a scary thing to see the resource officer. We did a scavenger hunt around the school so they could orient themselves to the building and find different things, and they each got a little sandwich bag, and at each location they put something in the bag. So we did lots of fun stuff for that event. All right. And then August 13th, 2019, it was a 6th grade only day. All right. So that was some coordination that it took from the district, and some real communication with families to let them know that, hey, this is just 6th grade. But I'll tell you what, if you haven't done a grade level only day, it really helps students and families. It was kids only in the building. It really helps the kids in the building get oriented without feeling like, oh my gosh, there's so many kids in here, and all these 7th graders, all these 8th graders, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So again, one of the programs that also helped with this was Web, Where Everyone Belongs. If you haven't checked that out, it's a national program. It involves some pretty intense training, but once you go through that training, it really does help out, and it's a program it's a real culture changer. All right. The web leaders are for us, it would be our 8th grade students. They were the web leaders. They had to apply, they got trained, all that kind of stuff. And then of course they became the leaders to help the 6th grade students the next year. All right. This year, because of COVID, they called them on the phone. They did Google Meets in small groups, but they still try to do things interactive. So it was just engaging, and kids felt like they had somebody in the building that was a young adolescent, like a middle schooler like them, that they could check in with. All right. So again, those are some events that we did to kind of help transition camp, and then a single grade only. All right. So if you want more information on that, let me know. All right. With our transition camp, believe it or not, we did look at it through the lens of the different characteristics of our young adolescents. All right. So this is what we did after we did the camp. All right. So we went through the lenses of physical, cognitive, moral, psychological, social, emotional, those being the developmental characteristics. All right. So we looked at the physical, and we said, all right, what did we offer? We did do minute to win it games. All right. So we did like a cup stacking thing. We did rotations to different sessions, and we did a school scavenger hunt. So we felt pretty confident that we had appealed to the physical aspect of our young adolescents to keep them up and moving. All right. So then what about cognitive? We did do like a trivia thing. So we did like a academic bowl, but it was more fun. It was like trivia and school about the school. And we also did some curriculum stuff. But we also thought for the cognitive part, we could have done, and we will do in the future when we can, add interest and learning style inventories to get kids thinking, about themselves and about their interests and things like that too. All right. For the moral part, moral ethical, they did talk to the school resource officer and a 6th grade lead teacher about decision making. All right. So we thought, okay, we feel okay about that. We also felt though, could we do a service learning component at the transition camp? Working with a local food bank that we have here at Westerville, we could have them bring in the supplies, and students could actually, make lunches for families in need who have some food scarcity issues. So that's a service component that we could add for that moral part. The psychological part, we did do a team building and get to know you activity. So we felt like, all right, that's kind of helping students get connected and that kind of stuff and feel more psychologically well there. And for the social emotional part, again, the team building part, so I put that in two categories. The get to know you activity, so that's why it's in that activity too. But we didn't do, and we should do in the future, time for self-reflection and self-assessment. You know, like, hey, how did I do today at the transition camp? All right, because it was from 8 o'clock to 1 o'clock. We fed them lunch. So 8 o'clock to 1 o'clock, that's a long time. So we could have, and we will in the future, provide time for self-reflection and self-assessment, which helps them cognitively and also helps them social emotionally. All right. So I would really encourage that as you plan your transition activities, whether it's elementary to middle or middle to high, that you take those developmental characteristics of young adolescents and say, all right, if these are the things that they're trying to achieve, psychological or physical, cognitive, moral, psychological, social, emotional, are we appealing to each of these through our activities? Right? Okay. So I know we've been talking fast, but this is actually kind of the conclusion of the formal presentation. Now, additional resources. I know that I kind of touted AMLE, the Association for Middle Level Education, but if you were to click on that document or click on this link right here, it would take you to their website where they would have transition information for middle schools and high schools and anyone working with young adolescents. A position paper from AMLE and NAESP, which is the National Association of Elementary School Principals. That is about transition with tips for families, and then Twitter. So I just want to give a little shout out to Twitter. Twitter is not just about following the Kardashians and all that kind of stuff, even though that's kind of a fringe benefit. Twitter is a great place for educational growth. It's true. So there are hashtags all over the place. And I'm going to click on this and just see what happens. This is a bold experiment. All right. So I'm going to click on it. And as you see the screen, okay. All right. So all I typed in the search window is middle school transition. All right. So there are people sharing, you know, images about school transition. There are people talking about, like, you know, first day of middle school. This was back in April, you know, April 12th. So some people, and there's an article from Pear Deck about transition. So anyways, don't just think of Twitter as, oh gosh, it's that crazy thing that, you know, causes all those problems and it's nothing but news and all that kind of stuff. It's actually great information. All right. So, whoo, man, I don't know about you, but that was a lot of talking from me, and I apologize for running at the mouth a little bit. So at this time, Xavier, what do you think? Are we ready for Q's and A's, or what do you think?
Yeah, there's actually 2 questions already in the chat right now for you.
Okay, cool.
Also, for the rest of our guests, please type any questions you have for Dru right now in the chat.
Okay, I see from Shamoon, what are some features in a software that you would want to see to help support the transition between middle and high school? I'd say, so in terms of a specific feature in software, I think the key is making sure that the software that you're using, like a learning management system, is the same from elementary, middle, and high. So that way they talk to each other and that the information, there's not a gap in communication. That's what I would say. So working with districts, if you are a vendor trying to provide software to a district for a learning management system, that's what I would say, is just touting the how they communicate with each other, elementary, middle to high. Especially with, so I'm going to use some other acronyms, RTI or MTSS. RTI is response to intervention, and MTSS is multi-tiered systems of support. So how does your software, if that's what you're trying to do, how does your software in the transition process communicate about multi-tiered systems of support and what students are in? Are they in level one of the MTSS pyramid, or are they in level 2, or are they in level 3? Does that make sense? Like, like what interventions are students receiving? That could be a great help, because it stinks when it's like the beginning of the school year and you're like, where are all these kids? Like, what supports do they need? If your software can show, boom, here's this kid, bam, this is what they need, that's awesome sauce right there. Hope that helps. What types of activities do you engage students in to help prepare for career exploration in the middle school? Oh my gosh, I love this question. So first of all, if you don't know the work of ACT, right? So that big test, the ACT, there's actually a big organization, and they've produced a research called the Forgotten Middle. And that research shows that if students are not college and career ready by 8th grade, you can't catch them up in time if by the time they get to 9th grade. Does that make sense? They've got to be college and career ready by the end of their 8th grade year. So that's the first part of my answer to that question. I wish we did more, quite honestly, in our school district. I'll just be quite honest about that, because our 6th graders do engage. So at the beginning of of their middle school experience, there is a class that they take here called Literacy Skills and Career Exploration. Awesome, gets them on the right foot, starts them thinking about their careers and options and things like that. But then 7th and 8th grade, it's just career day. So one day of the school year, there's careers, where they, people come in from the community that have different jobs, and kids go to the different classes and learn about those different careers. What I've seen that is more successful is there's a program that Georgia used to do called Georgia College 411. And it actually had stuff for 6th graders to do, as 6th graders with career exploration. And then as they matriculated to 7th, it got a little more rigorous and a little more focused. And then 8th grade, it got even more focused. So that way they were actually building their courses to lead toward college and career pathways that were available at the high school. So again, but it took a lot of effort, a lot from our counseling teams to get that done. So yeah, I hope that answers the question, because that is a key question to ask at the middle grades. It can't be just a high school thing. There you go. And I'm glad it was helpful. Thank you. Anybody else with a question? I'm here for a while.
Awesome. I guess that's it for questions today.
Okay.
But thank you so much, Dru, for coming, and thank you everyone else that's here for attending this talk. We really appreciate you taking your time out of the day to come join us with ASF Bay Area school counselors and education professionals. We try to hold these talks to keep everyone informed on the latest news in our field and to keep everyone furthering their learning, and we definitely did that here today. If you haven't already, please make sure to join our Meetup group. The link is going to be dropped in the chat. It's also what you use to register for the event. And please also stay tuned for our next event, which will be posted up on the Meetup group page. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day or rest of your night.